Welcome to my Snowy Pines transparent watercolor tutorial. This is a narrated step-by-step tutorial at normal speed. This is the companion video to my Snowy Pines demonstration video, which is set to music at 3x speed so you can watch the complete evolution of the painting uninterrupted. The photograph of Snowy Pines on the right was the reference and inspiration for this painting. Since this is a snow scene and it's going to have a lot of areas of white and textured white, I've decided that I'm going to use some masking before I begin my painting process to preserve the white of the paper. I'll begin by applying masking fluid to areas of the tree where the snow is piled up, and to do that I'm using a plastic squeeze bottle that I filled myself with masking fluid from a larger jar. I have 3 pine trees that I've sketched in this composition that are more in the foreground with one set back a little bit on the hill. And I'm taking the squeeze bottle and just randomly applying the masking fluid, although I have pre-drawn in my initial drawing some of the areas where I want the snow to be. So now I'm taking my squeeze bottle and I'm going to use it to mask some of the linear tree shapes that are set back here in the woods. And this squeeze bottle, it has a small opening, but it's not an ultra fine tip like some of them you purchase or some of the other ones I have that I filled myself. It doesn't have any metal tip on it, it's just plastic, and it does a nice job of distributing a fairly wide bead, much wider than say you would get from a fine line masking pen. I'm continuing to put these beads of masking fluid to indicate where the trees are going to be, and I'll put a glaze on this for the background, then these tree shapes will stand out. And this tool I'm using right there is a color shaper, it's called. It has a rubber tip and it does a good job of spreading the masking fluid. Sometimes I'll just use a squeeze bottle and distribute a small amount in an area shape I want to mask, and then I'll come in with a rubber tip shaping tool and just spread it around to fill the shape. Now I'm going to mask where I want to indicate some of the branches, and they'll have snow on them, but they're much finer than the line is much finer than the tree trunk, so I'm using a fine line masking pen for this, which does deliver a very fine bead of masking fluid. And I'm just randomly putting linear branch shapes shooting off the trunk that I've already masked. And I have another deciduous type tree here that has a lot of branches on it, so I'm continuing to use this fine line masking pen to mask this. And one of the things I've done is on my website, on my studio page, I've put a comprehensive list of the materials that I'm using in my paintings. I often get asked questions about the specific equipment materials that I use, so to make it easier, I decided to put a comprehensive list on the studio page of my website, and I've put the details of the majority of the items that I use in my painting process. Because this is a snowy, wintry scene, I'm going to take a toothbrush dipped in a jar of masking fluid, and I'm just going to splatter that randomly across my composition, and when I lift it off, it'll give the appearance of snow flying. It creates a nice texture for snow scenes. I'm going to put a wash on the wooded area, and I don't want it to get into the area that's where the snow is, so I'm turning my board upside down so I can have gravity working for me, not against me. And what I'm doing now is I'm wetting the surface of the paper with clear water because I'm going to be working wet into wet, and I want all that color that I apply in the washes to flow away from the snow. So that's why being upside down helps me in this situation. And it'll allow the wash to be a very loose, wet wash, wet and wet, without getting into the snow at all. The area that I want my wash is thoroughly wet, so now I'm going to come in with some color, and in this wooded area it has still a little bit of the remains of some fall color and surrounded by a lot of pine tree. So I'm just applying these colors in the areas where I want them to be, and these colors are going to kind of blend and gradate together because we're working on a wet and wet surface. And the colors that I've started here with are a little burnt sienna, sap green mixed with a little bit of Pyrrole Red to neutralize it a little bit. And as I work through this, I'm going to work in some Quinacridone Gold and Quinacridone Coral, which will make a little bit brighter sienna color. And this tone that I'm applying right now, this green, has a little bit of royal blue mixed in with a sap green and Pyrrole Red mixture to make it darker. You can see the areas where I applied the masking fluid, where it resists the water. You can see those shapes coming through. So there's a lot of color here, and I'm going to use my fine mist spray bottle I often use to help get these colors gradating together a little bit more. So I've dried my painting and I've turned it right side up, and now I'm going to come in with a very dark valued green and give the indication of where these pine trees are underneath the snow. And I'm using a 1/2 inch flat paintbrush here, and as I apply my paint, I'm using all sides of the brush. I kind of roll it as I move across the surface of the paper. It gives me different brush strokes as I fill this tree in. And you can see that I'm using the corner and I've used the side, and again on some of these branch kind of shapes where this dark shadow value goes underneath the snow. I kind of roll my brush a little bit as I go across, so it gives an uneven brush stroke as I apply my paint. You can see that I didn't take a small brush and try and render this tree. I took this 1/2 inch flat brush and just making brush marks to give the suggestion of the branches and the greenery that's on this snow-covered tree. But it hasn't taken very long at all to paint this. Now the colors I'm using are sap green with a little bit of Viridian and royal blue to really darken it up, and I still have a touch of Pyrrole Red in there also to take some of the rawness off the color. And now I'm continuing on the second tree here, which is in the foreground, and again you can see that I'm making just very quick brush strokes to give the suggestions of these branches, and it helps that I have this masking fluid to help give the textural quality to it as I apply the paint. The brush itself is a silver black velvet, which I really like. It's a squirrel and synthetic blend. I have a number of these that I use. I probably use more of this type of a brush than the others, and it just has a nice feel to it and holds the paint quite well. Now this other tree is set back just a little bit, and I'm using a warmer mixture of green and not quite as dark, and it's still sap green, but it has a little bit more Pyrrole Red in it to make it just a touch warmer. Now I have still a darker mixture. It's still the same colors, but It's very heavy on the royal blue to give it that dark value. I'm still using the same brush, the 1/2 inch flat, and I'm using the edge of it just to give a little bit more sharper application of the paint and give a little more definition to these branches. But the one thing I want to do still is I want to soften this up just a little bit and give the indication that it's not quite in focus, perhaps because of the snow. So to do that, I'm going to take the fine mist spray bottle and just touch the paint a little bit with it, and it's just enough to help diffuse it and soften a little bit. And that, once I lift off the masking fluid, will work together to kind of make it look like visibility isn't quite what it would be on a clear day. I'm going to take this same dark value and I'm going to take it back into the wooded area here in the background. And here I'm using, again, this is another silver black velvet brush. It's called it's a wash brush, but it's a jumbo round small, and it's one of my favorite brushes probably. It's just got a real nice soft feel to it, and holds a lot of paint and just does a really nice job applying general washes. Still working with this same darker green in the background here, and I worked it around some of these warmer shapes where these trees that still have some of the remaining fall foliage hanging on are, and it makes them come out a little bit more. In around those tree shapes though, I don't want to have those hard edges, so I'm using the fine mist spray. I'm going to soften those edges and just let the paint kind of run where it wants to go there. Taking a still darker value green in this background because I want to give it still a little bit more definition. So I'm going to take this wash brush and this dark value and just be very liberal applying it around some of those areas. I'm just dragging the brush. It's giving me a nice textural quality and nice randomness to the brush stroke, but it's still a little sharper edge than what I want. So I'm going to, little by little, I'm going to take my fine mist spray and soften these edges as I go. And keep in mind you're looking back into a wooded area on a snowy day, so there isn't a whole lot that's going to have a real sharp edge in that background. Doing more of the same on this other side of the composition. Taking the brush, and I'm getting the nice texture, but I'm still going to come in and soften this with a fine mist spray. And this color I've been using across this whole page so far has been Sap Green with Royal Blue and some Pyrrole Red, and then occasionally I've mixed in some Viridian to make it a little bit cooler. I want the tree here in the background, some of this with the fall foliage on it, to be just a little bit stronger tone. So I'm coming in with a mixture of Quinacridone Gold and Coral Red, and also some burnt sienna. And here again, I'm just dragging my brush on the side to give a little bit of a dry brush effect, and then I'm going to soften the edges of the shapes and the texture with the spray bottle. The other thing strengthening that tone does a little bit is help separate the green of the woods from the pine tree that's in the foreground. Those can kind of get lost together. Here I'm going to take a smaller brush with a little bit of that fall tone on it, and I'm just going to hit it on my hand, give a little bit of a splattered texture, and that texture is going to complement the texture that we get from the snow when I take off the masking fluid. But it also helps distribute a little bit of that color across the whole composition without being too much. Now I want to start working in some of that shadowed area of the snow, and I'm using a combination of Cobalt Blue, Ultramarine Blue, and Quinacridone Rose. And I'm just putting this on the shadowed side of the trees. And the one thing to keep in mind is that the ground isn't flat like a paved surface. It's irregular. The terrain has rolls to it, and the shadows don't follow a straight line. So use those shadows on the snow to help give the suggestion of the terrain that the shadow is laying on. In this instance, this is a hill, so it has some bumps in it, some bumpiness to it. So I'm trying to give the indication with my wash of this shadowed area that there is some roll and some bumpiness to this hill. Here I'm dragging my brush a little bit on the side. It gives just more of a natural randomness to the texture that I'm getting in the snow. I want to get a little gradation of this tone and some softer edges, so here again I'm going to hit that a little bit with a fine mist spray, and that'll help diffuse that color a little bit and soften some of the edges. Next, I'm going to take this pickup eraser and I'm going to start removing the dried masking fluid, which is going to reveal the white of the paper in the areas that I've protected. And you can see it's a very strong white that's showing now in this on top of this dark valued green. And you can also see the very fine lines and branches that I drew with the fine line masking fluid pen. As I remove the masking fluid from this tree, you can see there's a good opportunity to use lost and found edges here. You can have that white snow on the tree just blend right in to the snowy ground, and just pick and choose where you want to have a firmed edge, a hard edge, and other areas where you want to have let your edge get lost into the other area of the snow from the ground. Now I'm going to use a grade mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, and I'm going to tone down some of the white areas where I preserve the white from the masking fluid, so they don't look so stuck on and they start to feel like they're part of that background. I'm doing more of the same over on this side of my painting, toning down some of those white areas with this neutral tone. Now I'm going to come in with a very sharp point quill brush with a very dark value and just put a few finishing touches on this tree. You can see that I'm giving just the indication of some of the branch, some of the greenery of the pine tree sticking out here, and just some dots and dashes, just to make it look a little bit more intricate. I'm doing some of the same detailed brushwork on these other two trees with a dark value. little bit on the third tree here, a little farther back on the hill. I used a blue tone in the snow, and I don't want that to be isolated just to the snow in the foreground. So I'm taking a little bit of that bluish mixture and I'm touching it up into the trees some to give the indication of the shadowed areas up in the snow that's up resting up on the trees in the background there. It's not a lot, just enough to help carry that tone throughout the composition. And here I'm adding a little bit more to the snow on these trees, and I'm taking a stronger mixture here, a little more vibrant color in the foreground here to help draw the eye there. And this is just a very vibrant cobalt blue mixture that I'm putting on here. So I'm just going to touch some of the branches on the tree, and then I'm going to take a little of that tone and run it into the foreground. Not overdoing it, I'm just giving little touches, and that helps provide some color intensity in that foreground that again, it helps draw the viewer's eye into it. And that's my painting, Snowy Pines. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I appreciate you watching.